Welcome to the March meeting of the Carter Center Board of Councilors, our first in 2022. I'm Mary Moore, chair of the BOC. I've been a member of the board since 2008, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the education, the experience, collaboration, and opportunity to give back to the Carter Center over the years. I'm truly humbled to be the chair this year, and I look forward to our growth and progress together. This year will mark 35 years for the Board of Councilors and 40 since the founding of the Carter Center. We want to thank our BOC members for standing by the Carter Center. Since 1987, more than 750 people have served as BOC members by bringing guests and spreading the word of the center's mission to wage peace, fight disease, and build hope. In a moment, we'll welcome the newest members of the Board of Councilors, several who have joined us here in the day chapel, and several who are joining us through the webcast. In addition to our BOC members, we're very happy to have many guests with us today. As always, we welcome first the members of Atlanta's diplomatic community. As I introduce you, please stand, and audience, please hold your applause until everyone is standing and the introductions are complete. First, Consul General of Switzerland, Peter Zimmerlee. Consul General of the Netherlands, Ard van der Verst. Consul General of Nigeria, Ambassador Amin Smale. Consul of Canada and Acting Head of Mission, Kirk Duguid. Honorary Consul of Senegal, Julius Coles. Delegate of the Quebec Government Office in Atlanta, David Weiner. Senior Consultant, Hong Kong Information Office, Atlanta, Jean Hanratty. And from the World Affairs Council of Atlanta, its new president, Ricky Bevington. Have I missed any consuls general? Welcome, consuls. Carter Center Board of Trustees Chair Jason Carter recently sent new member invitations, and I'm happy to introduce several people who have accepted to serve as new Board of Councilors members. If you are a new member in the day chapel, please stand when I call your name and remain standing, and we'll applaud the group at the end. First, Ted Bloom, Managing Shareholder, Atlanta, Greenberg Traurig. Philip Bolton, Founder and Publisher Emeritus, Global Atlanta. Andrew Cathy, Chief Executive Officer, Chick-fil-A. Dr. Candace Steele-Flippen, Senior VP and Chief Communications Officer, Acuity Brands. Jim Green, President and CEO, TM Capital Corp. Aziz Hashim, Founder and Managing Partner, NRD Capital. Allegra Lawrence Hardy, Partner, Lawrence & Bundy. Erica Qualls-Batty, Area General Manager, Marriott International, and General Manager of the Atlanta Marriott Marquis. Joy Road Fox, CEO and President, Road Fox Construction Control Services. Ravi Shaligram, President and Chief Executive Officer, Newell Brands. Jewel Burke Solomon, Head of Google for Startups and Managing Director, Collab Capital. Max Sutherland, President and CEO, World Trade Center, Atlanta. Hassan Tarek, CEO, Atlanta Fire Cricket Club. Warren Wick, President, North America Salesforce. And Melody Wilder-Wilson, Attorney and Vice Chair, Southeast Regional Board, UNICEF USA. Welcome to our new members. And in recognition of their service to the Carter Center and the Board of Councilors, I'm honored to announce two life members of BOC. Tred Davis, Senior Counsel, Denton's. Tred was a member of the founding class of BOC in 1987. And Sham Reddy, Chief Administrative Officer, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary, Blue Links Corporation, and past chair of BOC. Congratulations. And so that we may introduce ourselves, let me ask all BOC members to stand. I also want to welcome one group among our guests today and ask them to stand. From Atlanta Lions Club, with their president, Dennis Rogers, welcome Lions. We have many more guests with us today. All of their names appear in your packet, and let me now ask all of our guests to stand and be welcomed. All guests. I'd like to introduce several key people from the Carter Center, and I'll ask them to stand. First, from the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library, we welcome the director, Dr. Meredith Evans. CEO of the Carter Center, Paige Alexander. Wonderful. Thank you. Now that we have our calisthenics out of the way, I have one board business item. And for our new members and also our guests, the program we will see today is standard for our BOC meetings. This morning, we will hear 4 presentations of the Carter Center's many programs and initiatives. At our next meeting in June, we'll hear about 3 or 4 different programs. So over the term of your membership, you will become well-versed in the Carter Center's work of waging peace, fighting disease, and building hope. With your knowledge and this work, I encourage you to fulfill your charge as a Board of Councilors member. That's to tell your friends and colleagues about the global work of the Carter Center. On our agenda today, Laura Newman, Director of the Rule of Law Program, will report on the Inform Women, Transform Lives campaign. Then, Dr. Greg Nolan, Director of the River Blindness Program, will give an update on progress against river blindness in Nigeria. Dr. Jenny Lincoln is Senior Advisor to the Latin American and Caribbean Focus and a professor at the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs at Georgia Tech, and she'll report on the recent elections in Venezuela. And Barbara Smith, Vice President for Peace Programs, will give an update, a special update on Ukraine. In the final portion of our program, Paige will give remarks and moderate questions from members and guests. Now, let's move on to our first presentation. Laura Newman joined the Carter Center in 1999 and now serves as Director of the Rule of Law Program, overseeing information, accountability, and justice projects in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Ms. Newman has served as a member of several international organizations on transparency and as a consultant to the State Department, World Bank, and the Inter-American Development Bank. Before joining the Carter Center, Ms. Newman served as an attorney representing people living below the poverty line. Laura earned her bachelor's degree in international relations and her law degree, both from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Laura, I welcome you to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be presenting to all of you today because last night I tried this speech on my 16-year-old and she told me it would be better if I put it to song. I will not be doing that. But I really am excited to share the progress of our Inform Women, Transform Lives campaign. Last year at this time, I told you about the leap of faith that the Carter Center, with your support, was taking in launching this unique campaign. I'm here today to tell you that our bet has paid off and to share some of the incredible successes with you. As many of you know, the Carter Center has been privileged to work for over 20 years to advance access to public information, including with a focus on women and marginalized populations. Access to information is a fundamental human right. However, our experiences and our studies have shown that around the world, women are not able to access information with the same frequency, ease, or rate of success as men. Women face critical obstacles, such as insufficient awareness of how to exercise the right, lack of mobility and time, illiteracy, cultural norms that work against her, and fear. To change this, we, 1, needed to raise awareness about women's rights, and 2, support governments in reaching women with critical information. These twin objectives serve as a cornerstone of the Carter Center's Inform Women, Transform Lives campaign. We chose to place cities at the center of the campaign. We recognize the growth in population and importance of cities, with more than 55% of the world's population now living in urban areas. And we understand that information most valuable to women is the most localized information. This became even clearer during COVID, with local governments playing a key role in contributing to keeping people safe and maintaining well-being and leading the way in COVID recovery and rebuilding efforts. In the end of 2020, we invited a number of cities to submit applications to join us in the campaign, and we received an extraordinary response. The first cohort of 12 global cities launched last year, March 8th, 2021, on International Women's Day. And over the past year, we've been honored to work with these cities as they implemented the campaign. And they did exceptional things. In Guatemala City, they raised awareness about women's centers that provide health, legal, and social services. In Colombo, Sri Lanka, they've created a mobile app for women to use when feeling unsafe in public spaces, particularly on local transportation, where it's estimated that over 90% of women face harassment. And in Cape Town, South Africa, the city utilized their public libraries to provide training to over 300 women from 14 townships on digital literacy and the services that the city provides. And then they encouraged them to share what they learned, and share they did. Not only has the city recorded more than 4,200 women directly reached with information about how to request services, but they also tell some great stories of impact. Okay, this is a quick warning. It may be a little gross, especially at 8 in the morning, but I wanted to share one of the stories that was recounted to me. So in South Africa, in the township that one of the trainees lives in, a large animal had died, and the decaying carcass was in the middle of the main street in the township. And all of the community just went around it. They found other ways, they took other routes, because they felt that there was nothing to do but wait for it to rot enough for them to remove it. So one of the trainees said to another woman, "Wait a second, this is the city's job. They come and remove it. We just have to call the city and they'll come and take away this dead animal." And the women around her were like, "No way, that's not gonna happen." And she said, "Just watch." So she made the phone call that she had learned about through the campaign, and the city people came that same day and took away the animal. And everyone was like, "Wait, we've lived all our lives in this township watching animals decay on our main roads, going around them when we just had to call the city." I get it that that's not something that might happen here in Atlanta, but just imagine how transformative that can be for that community. In Chicago, they chose to focus on increasing the number of women that receive the City Key. It's a program that provides a government-issued photo ID, and it's particularly important for marginalized women, such as survivors of domestic violence, who often flee without all of their papers and their documents and their identification, or people living in homelessness. This key unlocks services such as access to public libraries, to public transportation, and discount medicine. With the support of the Carter Center and the Inform Women, Transform Lives campaign, Chicago recently reached 60,000 keys distributed, literally opening the doors for women in Chicago. And here in Atlanta, the city focused their Inform Women, Transform Lives campaign on raising awareness and utilization of ATL Strong and ATL 311 to connect women to city services related to gender-based violence, economic mobility, housing, health, community safety, and food access. The city created a special Inform Women, Transform Lives page on their website that houses information on all the services for women. And you may have seen, I hope, in the airport, if anybody went through it, that they had digital signs around Inform Women, Transform Lives in the international terminal, the domestic terminals. It's been on MARTA, and community partners have promoted these services. In addition, the city has used the campaign to highlight their Safe Havens program for survivors of domestic violence in the city's fire stations, a service that I never knew even existed. Each of these cities used various ways to raise awareness of women's right to information and services, including through murals. So I want to share with you a video that captures some of the efforts and creativity of our first 12 cities. So in the video, you may have noticed a mural in Atlanta. In fact, we have 2 murals. The second was inaugurated on International Women's Day just a few weeks ago with Mayor Dickens, Jason Carter, and Paige Alexander, and approximately 70 others, including many of the council generals that are here today. It was a great event highlighting the importance of information for the women of Atlanta and the city's commitment to the campaign. Thank you again to all of you who joined us, and for everyone else, please check it out. It's on Ponce and Charles Allen Avenue, so when you're heading to Piedmont Park, it's right there on your left. Following the success, the Carter Center reached out to new cities and invited applications for the second cohort. On International Women's Day, again March 8th, we launched the next 12 cities. We now have 24 partner cities with a total population of more than 110 million people. These new cities, from Maputo to Paris to Montevideo, have hit the ground running. For example, in Nairobi, Kenya, they will be informing women about the city's health, legal, and psychosocial services and support mechanisms for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. In Bogota, they will use the campaign to let women caregivers know of available city resources, such as training, respite, and health services. During one of our recent roundtables, when we bring cities together, Casablanca heard about what Monrovia was doing around waste management. Monrovia being one of our first cities, Casablanca being in the second group. They were so inspired that they've decided to also focus on services around waste management and to take some of the lessons learned and experiences from Monrovia. Just a great example of peer-to-peer learning that we're also hoping to encourage. And in Washington, D.C., the city's planning to focus on women's entrepreneurship and economic empowerment. When we first started working with DC, I was shocked to find out that the income gap and inequities in DC are so stark. There's over a 21-year life expectancy difference depending on where you live in the city. So what they're going to do is really focus their campaign in those areas with women who are most in need of economic empowerment and additional resources. Looking forward to see what Washington, D.C. can do. And importantly, we've identified champions for women's right to information. During the Pledge campaign last year, we accumulated more than 6,500 signatures worldwide. Thanks to all of you who signed the pledge, and for those who are interested, you can visit our website at cartercenter.org/infopledge. We know the incredible number of competing priorities that cities must address each day, but we also know that by providing meaningful information and assuring that it actually reaches women, astonishing changes will happen. I look forward to coming back next year to share even more success stories of the ways in which informing women has transformed lives. Thank you.
Thank you for that incredible presentation, Laura. And the murals are so beautiful and powerful. Love the video. Dr. Gregory Nolan in 2020 was named director of the Carter Center's River Blindness Elimination Program, the Lymphatic Filariasis Elimination Program, and the Schistosomiasis Control Program, as well as the center's Hispaniola Initiative. Dr. Nolan joined the Carter Center in 2011 as an epidemiologist for the center's Malaria Control Program. Before that, Dr. Nolan worked as a project manager for a University of Minnesota malaria research program in Kenya. And prior to that, Dr. Nolan was a guest researcher at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Division of Parasitic Diseases. Greg earned his bachelor's degree from Davidson College. He earned a PhD in molecular microbiology and immunology from Johns Hopkins University's Bloomberg School of Public Health, and holds a master's of public health degree in global epidemiology from the Rollins School of Public Health at Emory. Dr. Nolan?
Thank you, Mary. One ambitious goal: to eliminate 2 parasitic diseases. Onchocerciasis, also known as river blindness. Lymphatic filariasis, sometimes called elephantiasis. 240 million, the number of people at risk for onchocerciasis globally. An infection transmitted by the bites of small black flies that breed in rapidly flowing rivers, thus giving rise to the name river blindness. And an infection which can ultimately lead to blindness if not treated. 863 million, nearly 3 times the former value. The number of people at risk for lymphatic filariasis globally, an infection transmitted by mosquitoes that can lead to lymphatic dysfunction, that leads to massively swollen legs and feet, and also male genitals. 4, the number of countries assisted by the Carter Center to become free of river blindness. These are the only 4 countries in the world to yet achieve verification by the World Health Organization of having eliminated river blindness. However, this means that in Africa, where 99% of the river blindness burden occurs, no country has yet achieved this milestone. In Nigeria alone, 51 million people at risk for river blindness, the most endemic country in the world. 136 million, the number of people at risk for lymphatic filariasis in Nigeria, the second most endemic country, but only behind India. But behind these statistics are individuals, men, women, aunts and uncles, grandparents. And for every one single person blinded by river blindness or with lymphedema from lymphatic filariasis, those impacts spread to their entire families. Resources spent on medical costs, lost income earning opportunities, and even lost opportunities for those who are asked to care for affected individuals. So one Carter Center principle: go to the hardest places first. So in 1996, the Carter Center began working with the Ministry of Health in Nigeria to eliminate river blindness. This work began in 2 states in central Nigeria, Plateau and Nasarawa State, shown red in the map. One single treatment, Mectizan, donated by Merck & Company, is able to eliminate and to interrupt transmission of river blindness within communities. This drug is donated by Merck since 1987 for as long as needed until river blindness is eliminated globally. Mectizan is also used in combination with another drug, albendazole, donated by GSK, to interrupt transmission of lymphatic filariasis. 25,416. The number of trained community drug distributors trained by the Carter Center to distribute these medicines in affected communities. These medicines are given either once or twice per year to all individuals, all eligible individuals within affected communities. So over the course of nearly 2 decades, more than 36 million treatments for lymphatic filariasis have been assisted by the Carter Center in these 2 states alone. And following the halt of treatment, none of more than 14,000 children tested were found to be infected with lymphatic filariasis, meaning the transmission has been interrupted. In 2017, the Federal Ministry of Health of Nigeria endorsed that these 2 states became the first 2 states in Nigeria to eliminate lymphatic filariasis as a public health problem. 27 million, the number of treatments distributed with Carter Center assistance to interrupt transmission of river blindness. Following the halt of these treatments in 2017, none of more than 15,000 black flies that transmit this disease were found to be infected, again indicating that transmission of river blindness had also been achieved. So last year, in 2021, these 2 states also became the first 2 states in Nigeria to achieve elimination of river blindness transmission. So 7 million, the number of residents in Plateau and Nasarawa states who are now free from river blindness and lymphatic filariasis. So 25 years after starting, this goal has been achieved. A remarkable achievement, but we are not satisfied, neither are our Nigerian colleagues. Carter Center continues to provide assistance in 7 additional states within Nigeria. And we're making progress, but we're not there yet, and we look forward to achieving these milestones in those states very soon. So let me conclude by just saying 2 number of words to say. Of course, thank you.
Our gathering here is essentially to celebrate the elimination of LF, elimination of onchocerciasis, and Plateau and Nasarawa states are the first to do this in Nigeria.
An zauna an daɗe shekara 30 ba a taba an zo an yi wannan abun ba, amma ni yau ina kafa ina nuna muku cewa an zo an yi wannan a shekara nan. Allah ya san dalilin da ya sa ya yi haka.
Four out of every 10 of LF cases are found in Nigeria. Nigeria has the highest burden of lymphatic filariasis in Africa, and Nigeria has the highest burden of onchocerciasis in the world. So we chose this place because the infections were high. We had interventions like the triple drug administration, where we gave 3 medicines that could deal with onco, LF, schisto, STH, and we also combined malaria.
Yanda na sani akwai wani kudan nan yana nan baki, in ya zo lokacin zai zo a ta ido, da ya zo sai ya fara man kai yana man kai sai in ji ciwon kai, sai an jima na fara gan wadansu tabo kadan sai an jima kawai ido na kuma baya gani sosai.
If you're talking about the Carter Center intervention, it will go far back to when we did guinea worms.
Da an zo ana ce ana raba wani magani da zai yi irin taimakon nan, sai akwai wani mai lura da gari ana kira su wai CDD ne, sun bi gida-gida suna ba mu taimako, wai na sha zai taimaka.
We chose this community because when we mapped lymphatic filariasis, that is elephantiasis, this village had a prevalence of 62%. That means out of every 10 people, 6 had the disease.
Da na makaranta sai idon na ya zo ya sa na dan dakata don in na so makaratu ma da din ba na gani, amma yanzu da na sha maganin nan yayi sai na ci gaba da makaranta na.
Plateau and Nasarawa are the only 2 states in Nigeria that have eliminated lymphatic filariasis as a public health problem. These are the only 2 states in Nigeria that have eliminated onchocerciasis transmission.
Don yanzu nan kam kai duk gari yau kam muna jin daɗi abinda Carter Center sun yi ma seri.
Ni ba abin da ina da shi wanda zan gaya musu, amma abin da ina so in gaya musu in ce nan gode musu.
To mun gode muku Carter Center.
Allah ya albarkace su, Allah ya ba su hikima sosai kuma.
I don't even want them to go.
The day they say that we had eliminated onco, The day they told us that LF has been eliminated as a public health problem, those are memorable days and they stand very indelible in my mind.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nolan. It was very informative, and certainly I feel the hope that we can and are fighting disease. Thank you. Dr. Jenny Lincoln is Senior Advisor for the Latin American and Caribbean Focus and a professor at the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs at Georgia Tech. This is Dr. Lincoln's second tour with the Carter Center. She served as Associate Director of the program from 1989 to 91. Dr. Lincoln has served as a credentialed international observer on 18 elections, including 13 with the Carter Center. In addition to her academic career, Dr. Lincoln has consulted on Latin American politics and U.S. foreign policy for the Ford Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, the U.S. Departments of State and Defense, the U.S. Agency for International Development, and many other organizations. Dr. Lincoln earned her PhD in political science from The Ohio State University and was a Fulbright professor in Costa Rica from 1984 to 1986. Dr. Lincoln.
Thank you all for being here. It's a privilege to share yet another story from the Carter Center of what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. I'd like to begin with this story with Venezuela. The story begins for the Carter Center well over 20 years ago, and Venezuela was one of the richest countries in Latin America. However, it has fallen into authoritarianism, economic disaster, and humanitarian crisis. Therefore, it's ripe for Carter Center attention. Venezuela is experiencing personality-driven authoritarian on the rise and democracy in decline. Therefore, a look at Venezuela is one of the hard problems that President Carter says, don't shy from the hard problems. Quick notes on Venezuela. A population of 29 million people, and I'll be telling you later on that that's a decline of 6 million people because of refugees who have left Venezuela. It's a young population with an average age of 30, and a GDP, again, falling from $352 billion in 2011 to just $47 billion now. Last year's inflation was 2,355%. GDP per capita fell from a high of 12,000 to last year at 1617. Venezuela is on the northern part of Latin America and borders Guyana, Brazil, and Colombia to the south. The story for the Carter Center is also one of looking at the personality-driven authoritarianism on the rise. And we'll look at this, I'm going to share this story through pictures with the people, the places, and what is happening. Beginning with Hugo Chavez, the president from 1998 to 2012, current president of the country, Nicolas Maduro, and a parallel government of Juan Guaido, and a political crisis that began really with the death of Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez is one of the most historic figures in Latin America. And age 34, he tried to overthrow the democratically elected government of a friend of President Carter, Carlos Andrés Pérez. He was jailed, but on his way to jail in a failed coup, he went on television and basically rallied his supporters to say he'd be back, and he was. He was freed from prison by another president, and he ran for president in 1998. And so the history right now of Venezuela is anchored in that election of Hugo Chavez and the aftermath. He was charismatic, and he stepped into the limelight and changed the landscape in Venezuela, including changing the name of the country, changing the flag, turning the seal on the flag from the head of the bird from right to left, very significant, and he was providing an alternative to elite domination. But he ran into trouble. His massive changes also sparked a revolt inside Venezuela. And here's a picture of President Carter and Cesar Gaviria, the Secretary General of the OAS, who spent 2 years in negotiations with Chavez to bring an end to the chaos at that time and to have a referendum. The referendum took place in 2004, and it was very simple. It was a yes or a no. The no was, and the chant was, Chavez no se va. The no was, no, we don't want him to go. The referendum was observed by the Carter Center and the OAS. And this is a line of people waiting to vote for 7 hours, and the Carter Center team, I was on that team on the left. This was the first time in Latin America that electronic voting had really been used so extensively. There was an electronic machine that was a touch screen vote. See, Chavez goes, no, he doesn't, and send. The voter only had to touch the screen. But there was a paper receipt that was spit out to have a proof of how the person voted. Another picture of the voting machines, the batteries that had to back up those voting machines in case electricity went out. And this is tiny writing on the slide, which is against the rules, but I wanted to show you the difference between the Spanish language and the English language. This was the question for whether or not Chavez should go. And it's very, very long and flowery about whether or not you're in agreement with stripping him of his rightfully elected position. Instead of just in English, we would say yes or no. Chavez won with 57% of the vote, and the Carter Center and the OAS did an audit of those paper tickets to confirm the vote, because the opposition to this day has never accepted that defeat. Chavez celebrated, and then he cleared the decks. He turned to China. He actually went to China for Christmas that year, and he invited the Russians to send supersonic jets, weapons, and ships. The first time a Navy vessel from Russia was in this hemisphere since the Cuban Missile Crisis. So you can begin to get the flavor of the deterioration of democracy and the rise of authoritarianism. He invited Putin to come and to have his picture taken in front of the portrait of Simon Bolivar, which was an archival moment for Chavez with every visitor. But he also had friends like Ahmadinejad, who came from Iran, and he turned to Iraq and Libya, which then contributed to the decline with US relations. He also had friends in the neighborhood, the president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, and Rafael Correa in Ecuador, Raul Castro in Cuba, but also the Kirchners in Argentina. Colombian presidents also made homage to Chavez in Venezuela. Then something happened. 57-year-old Chavez got sick, got cancer, and to this day, they've not said what the cancer was, but he went to Cuba for treatment. And there was an election right after he had had his treatment. You can see here, he is without hair, he's bloated. He had had treatment in Cuba, but he was bound and determined to run for election in 2012, which he did. And the opposition candidate is also one of the personalities still today, Enrique Capriles. Capriles lost to Chavez, and just 2 months later, Chavez went on television with his lieutenants, Nicolás Maduro, Diosdado Cabello, and said he was returning to Cuba for treatment. He held up the Constitution, said that Maduro would take over, and that was the last that Chavez was seen in public. There was an inauguration in January, but he wasn't there. The editorial cartoon says, well, let's just get started and see if he shows up. He didn't. He died in March of 2012 at age 57, and Nicolas Maduro, Diosdado at his funeral, then the vice president became president. Nicolas Maduro is president of the country today. So basically for almost the past 10 years, a non-charismatic Nicolas Maduro has been in charge of the government. And the decline that I identified at the beginning is under his watch. There were major protests. First, there had to be an election in 30 days after Chavez died. And Capriles ran again against Maduro, but Maduro won. The result was chaos in Venezuela. The opposition, who had struggled to compete against Chavez and Maduro, went to the streets. This is Leopoldo Lopez, another opposition leader who was jailed and subsequently went into exile. Chaos and repression, and an economic tailspin that saw the economy of Venezuela deteriorate completely, going from an oil-producing, oil-exporting country to a country that was in a humanitarian and an economic crisis. One little blip on the democratic horizon was the regularly scheduled assembly election in December 2015, and the opposition won overwhelmingly. And this gives you foreshadowing for the emergence of Juan Guaidó, who is currently head of a parallel government. More protests, more chaos, more economic decline, and protests in the streets. So how did Maduro respond? He created a different National Assembly, basically disallowed the Congress and said, we're going to have a new one. And that new one, a constituent assembly, elected 545 of his supporters to have a parallel Congress. At the same time that year, Maduro government arrested oil executives, now called the Citgo Six. In November of 2017, oil executives were summoned from Texas to Venezuela for a meeting and were summarily put in prison. Maduro ruled with a very, very heavy hand, not with the charisma of Chavez. And in 2018, called a snap election, he moved the presidential election up and basically competed against his own friends in that election, which was not recognized internationally. Then it began the massive migration from Venezuela. As I mentioned, over 6 million people have fled from Venezuela since Maduro's last election. So now who is Juan Guaidó and where did he come from? Well, in January of 2019, when they had the inauguration for Maduro, Juan Guaidó stepped up and said, the Constitution says if there is not a legitimately elected president, then the head of the National Assembly becomes president. So he claimed the presidency. And then President Donald Trump recognized him, as did 50 other governments in the world. So currently, the political landscape of Venezuela has two presidents, one officially recognized by the United Nations and one recognized by the United States and 49 other countries. Maduro has the military, Juan Guaidó has the opposition. Maduro went on television and challenged Donald Trump. He really, really wanted to be invaded. He wanted the United States to invade Venezuela and have him basically be the hero, even a fallen hero, defending Venezuela against the United States. So where are we now? At a stalemate with the United States government, a stalemate with the government of Maduro. the opposition trying to organize to have some kind of presence and negotiations with the government. But Maduro has been negotiating with China and Russia for more weapons, economic support, and an attempt to avoid US sanctions with sending his oil around the sanctions to these countries. Is dialogue possible in 2021? What about the response to the humanitarian crisis? And is there a potential military conflict? Well, in the midst of all this scenario, the Carter Center received an invitation to send an electoral mission to Venezuela for the November 2021 regional and municipal elections. This was a bit of a surprise, and because the conditions inside Venezuela do not meet international standards for any election. So here's where we had to decide, do we engage or not engage, and why? Well, the UN was invited, and the EU was invited, and we knew that the Venezuelan government understood how the Carter Center would proceed with calling a spade and identifying how the elections did not meet international standards. But they still invited us anyway. And the opposition, skeptical at first, came to say, if you, Carter Center, can go to Venezuela and directly and objectively identify what's going on here, we're for it. So we had the support of the opposition, the government invited us, the EU was going, the UN was going, and it was a phenomenal experience. I'm going to ask you, I want to show this in a video. I thank Soya Ellison, who went with us under challenging circumstances to look at this election and produce this video. Brandon?
Municipal and regional elections don't usually attract much interest outside the country where they're taking place. But when Venezuelans went to the polls last November to choose their next governors and mayors, the world was paying close attention.
The country is under a crisis, a political crisis, economic crisis, humanitarian crisis, and has been for almost a decade.
The opposition boycotted the last two elections, claiming that the ruling party had rigged the system, and in some cases, the votes. But not this time.
The opposition chose to participate in an uphill battle, an uneven playing field, but they chose to participate.
After receiving an invitation from Venezuela's Electoral Council, the Carter Center sent a small team of international election experts to Caracas to assess the electoral process. The team took part in more than 50 meetings, sitting down with both government and opposition leaders, members of the Electoral Council, human rights organizations, business leaders, and ordinary voters. Though the team was too small to assess voting and counting processes, they did spend Election Day visiting polling stations to continue learning about the process.
Thanks for coming and supporting our democracy here in Venezuela. Hear me, please. Your presence here is very important because you can see that we're voting. We're voting, exercising democracy here.
It is easy to stay home and say this and that, but if I don't exercise my right to vote as the Constitution says, then I feel that I shouldn't complain or ask for changes. This is why I'm here.
When the votes were tallied, the opposition had won 55% of the overall vote, but only 4 of 23 governorships and 120 of 335 mayoral seats.
The opposition was so split, so fragmented, that they did not gain a lot of territory.
The deck is also still stacked against the opposition, as the Carter Center pointed out in a preliminary report released in December.
The government called the elections, but also really controlled the resources and dominated the political scene with abuse of the state resources throughout the electoral process.
But people inside and outside the country say these elections could serve as a catalyst for change.
It's very important to note that even though these were regional and municipal elections, that a struggling Venezuelan population decided to go to the polls. In a democracy, the only way to make a change is to participate. The November 2021 elections may be a turning point toward reconciliation and resolution of the crisis in Venezuela. So what are the lessons learned from this exercise in Venezuela? First, the Carter Center is seen as a trusted partner, interlocutor in many, many places in the world. Number two, maintaining access to all sides is something that we're known for and something that we do. Patience and perseverance pays off. This is over 2 decades of involvement in Venezuela, and at the end of this crisis, hopefully there will be some kind of resolution with the 2024 elections. Another lesson is that strengthening democracy in our hemisphere requires collaboration and efforts over time. And again, thinking of President Carter, the Carter Center does not shy away from hard problems. Last, there's a footnote to this story. After a tremendous impasse between the United States government and the government of Nicolas Maduro, with engagement with the opposition, a high-level US government delegation flew very secretly, arrived to talk with President Maduro. In other words, the chicken and the egg, who's going to blink first? They both blinked together to say, we need to address some of these problems head on. And I really, really salute the people who went on that. The message, they carried messages about how to repair US-Venezuelan relations. Politically inside this country, that's not popular. It was a bold move by the Biden administration, and it does have some political costs. But it meant the release of 2 of the US prisoners, and it also began to approach what kind of sanctions relief could benefit the humanitarian crisis. And it's clear that all eyes are on the 2024 election. So the Carter Center has been there for years, looks at it now, and it's one of those countries that will be on the drawing board to consider how to proceed. Thank you for your time listening and for looking at this story.
Thank you, Dr. Lincoln, for leading and doing the hard work and for a very informative presentation. Barbara Smith joined the Carter Center in 2020 as Vice President for Peace Programs. Prior, Ms. Smith was principal and founder of the international consulting firm Mountain Time Development. Among many highlights in her career, Ms. Smith has served as a senior associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, where she focused her efforts on human rights, a deputy assistant to the administrator in the Bureau of Policy, Planning, and Learning, among several roles, with the United States Agency for International Development, a director for Afghanistan and Pakistan Affairs with the National Security Council, a senior director for governance and law at the Asia Foundation, and as a spokesperson in Bosnia and Herzegovina for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. She earned her master's degree in political science from Texas State University and her bachelor's degree in government from the University of Texas, Austin. Barbara, will you join us?
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully your morning coffee has kicked in because I'm going to try to condense what could probably be a presentation of an hour into less than 10 minutes. I'm going to provide a very, very brief overview of the current context and conflict, and then talk about what the Carter Center is and isn't doing. Okay, so wanted to orient everyone. Ukraine is, of course, the second largest country in Europe. It's about the size of Texas, where I grew up. Its population is roughly 43 million people. Working from the east, Ukraine is surrounded by Russia, of course, Belarus, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Moldova, and Romania. And of course, the Black Sea is to the south. It is wonderfully rich in agriculture. You've probably heard that if you've been watching CNN. It's been referred to the breadbasket of Europe, but it's also modern and technologically advanced with significant economic potential and potentially significant impact on the global economy. Historically, Ukraine, like most of Europe, has been conquered by countless dynasties. They first formed an independent Ukraine People's Republic in 1917, breaking with Tsarist Russia, and only to be forcibly reintegrated into the newly created USSR in 1922. More recently, in 1991, shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union, they again declared their independence as a neutral state, securing agreements with both NATO and the Commonwealth of Independent States, although, of course, without sustaining membership in either alliance. And in 2013, Ukrainian President Yanukovych ended the Ukraine-EU agreement with an intent to move toward an alliance with Russia, but this provoked the so-called Revolution of Dignity, and a new government was formed. This in turn led to the 2014 Russian invasion and annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass, which we're all now very familiar with. So today, where are we with the current conflict? As of a White House briefing I participated in Monday, there are roughly 22% of the population displaced, with 10 million displaced thus far, and another 12 million currently, or as of Monday, I think that number's likely grown since then, sheltering in place where it is unsafe for them to try and move. The US and the EU are scaling up their humanitarian assistance and publicly drawing attention to violations of international law and working with others who can be helpful interlocutors to negotiate for humanitarian access, something I'll talk about later in terms of the Carter Center. They're also assessing the impact of the conflict on food security and other issues. In terms of the conflict itself, according to the Institute for the Study of War, which is producing very good daily updates on the conflict, Russian forces are likely moving to a phase of protracted bombardment of Ukrainian cities due to the failure of Russia's initial campaign to, quote, encircle and seize Kyiv and other major cities with a possibility of using chemical weapons. The seriousness of that situation led NATO to call an unprecedented meeting of NATO members yesterday. Okay, so what has the Carter Center been doing in terms of its reaction and its response? So I think it's important, I wanted to put this up on, and I know there are a lot of words there, sorry, but it's President Carter's statement, and I wanted to share it with you and note his unequivocal statement regarding Russia's use of military and cyber weapons against Ukraine, that it, quote, violates international law and the fundamental rights of the Ukrainian people. The humanitarian impact in Ukraine is tragic and I would say echoes experiences of conflict leading to profound human suffering in other countries where the Carter Center works, such as Sudan, such as Mali, such as Myanmar. It's been heartening to see the international support for Ukraine, and we hope that it will prompt more attention to some of these lesser publicized conflicts in the world where we work as well. These lesser known conflicts where other organizations cannot sometimes or will not engage are often where we find ourselves operating as the Carter Center. On Ukraine, it is important to note that humanitarian assistance, one of the most urgent needs right now, is not actually our area of expertise, so we're of course not providing direct humanitarian assistance. Just as we didn't leap into COVID to try to administer vaccines ourselves, so too in this situation, our response needs to be both strategic and appropriate for the context and for our capabilities. Our raison d'etre is to figure out where we can best use our voice and fill a gap and have the greatest impact consistent with our founders' values. Okay, so with that being said, we are, of course, watching this situation closely and considering what the Ukrainian crisis, what this means for the Carter Center's work, and where we should engage. Broadly, globally, this invasion represents a key event in an ongoing transition of the global order, marked by a rise in authoritarian states, democratic backsliding, as well as a weakening of shared norms and institutions of the so-called liberal international order. This conflict is a stark and grim reminder of the challenges we face and a chance for us as the Carter Center to recommit to programs that resolve conflict and support democracy and human rights. Okay. So specifically, what are we doing right now? So I want to talk about 4 different ways that we have been engaging over the past now month. I think we just marked a month of this conflict. The Carter Center has worked on best practices in leveraging sanctions for conflict resolution and humanitarian purposes, and in identifying pathways to what we call de-escalation of sanctions. Our experience in our work in Syria has shown, among other recommendations, the importance of assuring that sanctions are not simply punitive, but are accompanied by diplomatic efforts to end a conflict. So it's also key to insulate humanitarian work from sanctions. So we're actively sharing, there are other examples that I could share as well, but we are actively sharing that expertise with policymakers working on Ukraine. Another example that is relevant to that context is on the use of cyber weapons. The Carter Center's data scientist, Michael Baldessaro, just published an article, which I recommend to you, highlighting the impact of cyber attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure and pressing for international standards and norms regarding the use of cyber weapons. Those do not currently exist. And we're engaging on an ongoing basis with industry leaders around that conversation. Third, in addition to this expert advice on sanctions and cyber weapons, we're also using our voice to call attention to human rights violations, specifically in terms of our China-focused program. As one example, we've engaged our counterparts to talk about how China can be helpful in this situation. This has included sort of 3 things I wanted to mention today. Speaking with the Chinese embassy representatives during their recent visit, a publication on the China-focused website, I should say, of an op-ed by Professor Hu Wei of Shanghai College, which was entitled Possible Outcomes of the Russo-Ukrainian War and China's Choice. The combined number of views for the English and Chinese version of that piece stands, as of yesterday, at over 1 million views. This online engagement has also been picked up by other publications, including the New York Times and The Guardian. And of course, our CEO, Paige Alexander, just published an op-ed entitled China Can Play a Vital Role to End the War in Ukraine, and it was published in Chinese, and the Chinese version of the Financial Times. In addition to those specific engagements, you saw the statement by President Carter, but we're also signing up to other statements to call attention to these human rights violations I mentioned earlier, signing on statements with the Alliance for Peacebuilding, the Global Democracy Coalition, and others. Okay, so in addition to these sort of ways we can use our expertise to engage and support others, we are also assessing the impact that this conflict can have on our own current programming. And I just wanted to give a couple examples from Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. So for example, in Venezuela, where, as you heard from Jenny, we have a long history of engagement. President Maduro, we've been watching sort of to see how he has engaged both the U.S. and Russia. We saw that he issued almost immediately after the start a statement in support of Russia, but then a few days later it hosted this high-level delegation that Jenny mentioned. And in terms of the Carter Center, so we're sort of monitoring what's happening there. And in terms of the Carter Center, it's hard to tell yet whether this is going to mean an opening of democratic norms or if it will lead to a further ties between Russia and Venezuela. But that would be one context we would monitor. Another example is with respect to we have both conflict work and health work in Mali. The Russian paramilitary entity called the Wagner Group, which you may have heard of, is now supporting the Malian government after the government pushed for an expulsion of European forces given European support for sanctions there, they turned to Russia. So as an independent observer of the peace process and given our peace health work, we're watching to see what happens with those dynamics. Do they increase their engagement with Russia, or are they going to do something else? And then, of course, given Russia's focus on Ukraine, we're also watching how that impacts their engagement in Syria and in turn our work with Syria. So there are lots of dynamics that we're sort of watching in terms of Russia and client states and their engagement with Russia vis-a-vis the US and also just in general US-based nonprofits. Okay. So what I would leave you with is the fact that the potential of the conflict in Ukraine is significant for not just the Carter Center, but also the world. In other words, we should be thinking about what does this conflict mean for the liberal world order, and how can the Carter Center best influence that outcome for the better. Dissertations will no doubt be written around the aftermath of this war, and who knows? Maybe the next Madeleine Albright or George F. Kennan will emerge to lead us collectively into this new world order. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you for that great update, Barbara. Paige Alexander joined the Carter Center as Chief Executive Officer in June 2020, continuing a distinguished global development career with over 2 decades of experience spanning the government and nonprofit sectors. Ms. Alexander held senior leadership positions at the United States Agency for International Development during 2 presidential administrations. In her highest role with the USAID, she led the Middle East and North Africa Bureau, overseeing 1,000 employees, programs in 12 countries, and a budget of over $1.4 billion. Between her assignments with USAID, Ms. Alexander was Senior Vice President and European Founder President of IREX, an international civil society, democracy, and education nonprofit. Before her appointment to the Carter Center, she served as Executive Director of the European Cooperative for Rural Development in Brussels and Amsterdam, working to improve the livelihoods of farmers, families, and communities in Africa. Paige, will you join us?
Thank you. It's so nice to see this room getting towards filled. It's with each Board of Councilors meeting, we seem to have a few more people here, so all the seats, it's just great to see people. I will tell you, sitting in the audience and looking and listening is a different experience for me, slightly out of body in a way, because I've been sitting as a pandemic CEO. I've been sitting behind my computer screen for almost 2 years now, listening to people talk, but of course trying to multitask, as all of us do, and really being able to be in the audience and listen to these amazing presentations has been great. We also have a panel who are just starting to take off now, which is wonderful. You know, Laura leaves for Bangladesh in a couple of days. I just saw Greg in UAE as he was coming back from Sudan this past week. Jenny's been all over between Venezuela and Colombia, and Barbara leaves for Mali. So we are starting to get back on the road again, and that's a really wonderful feeling because you can see the work that we are doing. So much of it has been quiet diplomacy, quiet conversations, and working directly with our community development leaders. As you know, Greg talked about the health programs. I just got back from UAE last night. So I'm properly caffeinated now, but it was for the Guinea Worm Summit, a global health summit, where we were celebrating and recommitting to the eradication of guinea worm. When we started started working on guinea worm, it was 3.5 million worms a year in 21 countries. And if you were to line those worms up, it would be from Dubai to London. And now we're here, we only have 15 worms left in the world in 4 countries. So if you were to line those up, it'd be from here to Dr. Evans. And this gives you a sense of how far we've come. And as Greg talked about, the eradication or the elimination in certain areas, breaking that transmission is hard fought. It's difficult to do, and it's not something that we can take credit for when you necessarily break transmission. You have to get through the surveillance piece and on the other side so we can get to eradication. So looking at the Carter Center as an organization that does global health, eradication and elimination of diseases, that does the democracy work, we're at a prime point now that, as Barbara was talking about Ukraine, looking at how world events are shaping what we do, whether it's COVID-19, the pandemic that none of us expected, and how that affects global health and how that affects the ability for contact tracing, again, something that only public health officials really understood what contact tracing was until all of us started to be contact traced when we were exposed to COVID. These really impact every element of what the Carter Center is doing. So I want to thank you as the Board of Councilors. I want to thank Mary for stepping in and agreeing to chair in 2022. And Sham Reddy, who is a friend and sat through 2 years of trying to chair the board when we were in a very hybrid fashion. I want to thank him for shepherding us through that COVID period, and me personally for introducing me as the new CEO. Mary explained this to you. The Board of Councilors is not a fundraising organization. We look to all of you to spread the word, to talk about what the Carter Center is doing. The outreach to the business community in Atlanta is important because as they're on the road all the time, it's difficult for us to be telling people about what we're doing. So thank you for being here to accept listening to these messages so you can talk to other people about it. You have circles that we obviously don't have. Making friends across Atlanta, coming back after I grew up here. I left in 1984 after high school, but my whole family still lives here, so I've been coming back for 35 years, but I've never lived in Atlanta as a grown-up. And so now being here as a professional and coming in during COVID again, not meeting a lot of people except on screen, it's been really nice for me to start getting back into the community and talking about the work we're doing. But you all are our ambassadors. You amplify that message, so thank you for your time. And we really want to build a strong base. It was great when Laura showed the picture of Charles Allen and Ponce de Leon. The Carter Center's not really done a lot of work in Atlanta. When we first started, we did Global 2000. I think we had the Atlanta Project. But aside from that, we are made up of international development specialists. We are people who know how to do things overseas, but not necessarily domestically. And now that we're here and we're able to do things in Chicago and Atlanta, that we're working on election legitimacy, as Jenny talked about, you saw a lot in Venezuela that maybe looks a lot like what was happening in the United States. We did want to look in our backyard, and those are things that we are doing now. We're in 4 different states looking towards the midterms, again, in a non-political way, but trying to discuss the polarization that has happened. And so we're doing things domestically and internationally. We've also, with the Board of Councilors' help, we've had folks like Jeff Hillemeyer, who is helping us. When I initially came in, Sham introduced me to him, and Dragon Army did look at our web presence, because again, we punch a bit below our weight in many of these areas. So Jeff, as a Board of Councilors member, brought Dragon Army in, looked at things. We're now using Dragon Army for part of our conflict resolution and our violence mitigation work in the U.S. And so thanks to Jeff and his group at Dragon Army. YKK, Jessica, and Jim have always been there to be super helpful in providing everything from PPE when we needed to get masks out to the field. They really stepped in and very appreciative. And Jane Shivers and Bill Sharp heard one of the presentations on mental health and very quickly sort of stepped in and helped introduce us to people on the mental health assistance side. So along with that, we've also had Board of Councilors members, about 50 of you, participate with the Anti-Defamation League in roundtables, business roundtables we've been doing to talk about polarization. And so there are spaces for you to get involved, and I encourage you to do that. And Mary and I are very anxious to find additional ways to get the Board of Councilors involved. Working with our new Vice President for Communications, Matthew DeGallen, we are going to look at ways we can pull you in a little bit more. So sharing highlights, everybody did a wonderful job today talking about this work. Our guinea worm video is online now. I think we have a teaser, but we're not going to show it because we don't want to run too late. But you can see it. It's called Just 15, and it talks about those last 15 Martins. And it's really, President and Mrs. Carter saw it yesterday, and they said it brought tears to their eyes. It's really an amazing way to look at their legacy and the long-term work that we've been doing. So members will hear about other health programs, as Mary said, over the quarterly meetings that we do. You'll get an opportunity to hear about this. River blindness is only one of them. We also have programs in trachoma, which is the world's leading cause of preventable blindness. I want to thank the Lions Club, the Atlanta Lions Club, and their participation with Lions Club International Foundation, who has been a long time and deeply generous partner in this fight for river blindness and trachoma. So we will continue to look at all of the elements of our peace and global health programs that affect international events. Again, we're not going to jump in, as Barbara said, we didn't jump into COVID-19 and start delivering vaccines because that's not us. That's not what we do well. And we're not going to do it in Ukraine, but we are going to take opportunities, Ethiopia for the national dialogue, as we start looking at how governments are trying to talk to each other after conflict. Where can the Carter Center fit in? We used to have President Carter's voice be able to walk in and say, I'm here, how can I negotiate? But now we have a group of experts who can do the same thing. And we've got the State Department and the White House and Congress calling us to say, can the State Department can the Carter Center step in here? So this is the space that we plan to occupy. So with that, I wanted to open it up to questions people might have. Again, I'm highly caffeinated enough that I can try to answer them, but so I see Ricky Bevington. Oh, Ricky, hang on, yeah. Sorry, we could run the microphones around, but if you have questions, there's a microphone there and on this side. So, and I'm fortunate enough to sit on the board for the World Affairs Council, and so Ricky is the new president. We're happy to see her having started very quickly the first 8 weeks.
Jump right in, and then Putin in my honor started a war, so we can jump into helping Atlantans understand events in Ukraine. So thank you. I particularly appreciate Barbara's presentation. As a 20-year journalist, of course, I always have the first question. Elections are very much still on the minds of Georgians here, and speaking of connecting the Carter Center's work to the United States and to Atlanta and Georgia, my question about your election observation and work, are you all in collaboration with the UN or EU or other international organizations going to be observing Georgia's elections?
Yeah, so I'll start a little bit because you saw as they were doing the election recount in Venezuela and all of those sealed boxes, that's where we stepped in. When I started in June 2020, I went down to Plains and talked to President Carter and said, we have to look at this in our own backyard. So as we were doing that, we ended up being the only organization allowed to be part of the risk limiting audit in Georgia. You know, that first recount, the one that actually counted, that where the votes were counted. My last election observation work was not with the Carter Center, but was in Ukraine. And I will tell you, as I sat in Fannin County in Georgia and Fulton and DeKalb and saw election administrators do what they do all over the world, they pick up the hard copy vote and they would say the candidate's name, they'd hand it to the person next to them who would say the candidate's name out loud, and then it would go in a box with the candidate's name. And that's how they were counted. And it was done very openly, and I could have been anywhere in the world, but the snacks were better and there was heat and air conditioning here, as we sat for literally 48 hours watching people do their job as election administrators. So to the question Ricky was asking about whether we would work with the UN or others, we are trying to determine, and I'm going to hand this over to Barbara, and the 4 states that we're working in, what exactly we're going to be doing. So Barbara, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks. And one thing I would first start with is in terms of international organizations observing, just to mention the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, for example, has sent a delegation or delegations in the past elections, but they would make their determinations based on their own internal conversations. Having said that, we meet with them and talk to them regularly, but in the U.S., of course, is what I've heard from others is we have such a strange system because so much is determined on a state-by-state basis in terms of what's allowed and what isn't allowed. So that's just an interesting observation that I've heard from others in my experience overseas. The second point is, as Paige said, yes, so we're looking at the potential for observing risk-limiting audits in particular in 4 states. We're in an assessment phase at this point to look at what that would look like. Our ability to observe, of course, depends on getting access so that we can observe a process in its entirety. So that's an important we have certain rules and standards that we have to follow in order to effectively observe. Anything else?
May I echo on that and note that it's easier to do election observation in a country that has a national electoral council. And the United States has 50 of those. And so that's what Barbara's identifying is the fact that any kind of observation in the United States would have 50 different modalities because of the rules of the state. So that's a little bit different. And international observers who usually come to the United States are they're invited by the Department of State, and they really are just looking. They're not able to really evaluate all 50 systems either.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we look at international election standards, and we are actually using that handbook here in the U.S. We are talking to secretaries of states about signing what we would do overseas, a code of conduct, have the candidates talk about campaigning on the issues. And so I guess we're not calling it a code of conduct now, it's called what's it called? Yeah. It's not a code of conduct because apparently the semantics of that, I've now forgotten the name of it.
It's a declaration of principles.
No, but the code of conduct has changed to a different name, a contract yes. Anyway, yes. So we're contemplating where we can get involved. As I think I've mentioned at a previous Board of Councilors meeting, when we were doing the risk limiting audit, we all went in with our blue Carter Center t-shirts, as you saw in Venezuela as well. I was unaware, having lived in Europe for the past few years, that blue had been so taken by one party and red so taken by another party that we walked in and we were put on the Democratic side. We can walk into Liberia or Venezuela and they're happy to see an international delegation. But when we walk into Fulton County with blue shirts on, game over. We're put on a very specific side. So there are those elements. And of course, Georgia, Texas is the only other state that has as many counties as we have, 159 counties here. All of those rules are slightly different too, which makes it difficult to bring international observers in and know what rules they're supposed to follow. So thanks, Ricky.
Hello, I'm Sherry Mann Stewart, and whenever I'm here, I'm standing in understudy for my mom, Connie Stewart, who's a longtime member of the Board of Councilors and of the Carter administrations, both statewide and nationally, but her health keeps her from being here these days. However, I'm a member of the creative and artistic communities here in Atlanta, and so I certainly appreciate all the work that everyone's doing, but I do want to give a shout out to Laura, to Ms. Newman's presentation and those beautiful murals. And I'm hoping that I'm not the first to think of this, that I hope you all will take all of those images and create some greeting cards that we can continue to spread the word of the good work you're doing. I would love to have those cards to send all throughout the year to be able to show that.
Wow, that's a fantastic idea. And soon we'll have 24 murals, so we'd love to do that. I'm looking at Paige.
I think that's great. We have the greeting cards of President Carter's paintings, but I think these murals would be fabulous.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that great idea.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks. And to your comment about the creative community and the artistic community, we are also engaging the community in our human rights work and our racial injustice work. And so we have been talking about the use of music and explaining racial issues and conflict issues. So all of those things are on our website, which I would drive you to. It's sometimes hard to find different elements, but if you dig down, I think you'll see a lot more of what we're doing in that area as well. Great. Faster. Yeah. You can move, yeah.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Ambassador Amina Smaila. I'm the Consul General of Nigeria here in Atlanta. And I'm pleased to see you again. See you, Paige. And thank you very much, the panelists, for the very informative and insightful presentations. Actually, President Jimmy Carter is a true living legend and is held with the highest esteem and love in Nigeria. So I'd love to commend the Carter Center for expanding and sustaining its numerous projects in Nigeria. And these programs have continued to bring healing, succor, and upliftment in millions of lives in Nigeria. And we cannot thank you enough. And the Nigerian Consulate here in Atlanta stands ready to continue to collaborate with the Carter Center in order to address new challenges in Nigeria on the spot. And particularly Mr. Greg Nolan, I'd like to thank you very much. And I'd also love to hear about your most challenging moment in Nigeria and how the consulate can help ease most of the projects, the tasks, and the challenges you face. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Greg.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador. Appreciate your attendance with us this morning, and of course, everything we do is in partnership, real partnership with the Ministry of Health in Nigeria, and so we appreciate the support at all levels. I can say very honestly, today we are having challenges with importation of the medications into Nigeria. This is something that initially seemed attributable to the supply chain, the global supply chain efforts that were impacted due to COVID, but especially in two of the countries that we presently assist. These challenges are still persisting, and in fact now it seems that these are delays with importation and administrative approvals of these medications into Nigeria and also into Ethiopia, for example. So any assistance you might be able to offer in helping us to solve those challenges. As I said, these medications are distributed once, and where intensity is high, twice per year. And so when there is any delay in receipt of those medications, it really impacts our ability to distribute medications twice per year. So I very much welcome your offer, and we will take you into conversation on that. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Oh, I see one more question coming up, and then I'm going to hand it over to Mary.
My name is Phil Bolton. I'm a new member, and I must say I've been extremely impressed this morning about how lessons in one area can be applied to another area. Given the refugee crisis, I'm just wondering if there are any specific programs at the center to at least observe what's going on in the whole refugee crisis in Ukraine and elsewhere as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Appreciate that. We are part of a group called Welcome USA. President Carter and all most former presidents are co-chairs of Welcome USA. I would invite you to go look at the website. We also tweeted out something and had a social media can't remember what else we did yesterday about the refugee crisis in Ukraine, the 100,000 that are going to be allowed to come in. Again, I want to be very careful about what the Carter Center does and very intentional and not jumping into the next shiny penny of what is in the news. And so we will work to support organizations working with refugees, whether it's psychosocial programming, mental health programming. We do a lot of school-based behavioral health. And we're going to be working in Clayton County with the refugees that have come in from Afghanistan, but we're not getting involved any more directly than what we're doing with Welcome USA now. So I recommend you go look at that website and see what we are supporting in terms of other organizations doing the heavy lift on the humanitarian side. So with that, let me turn it over to Mary. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your time and commitment and your work with the Board of Councilors moving forward as Mary and I find additional ways to get you involved. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Paige. You found a great balance of caffeine after your long trip home yesterday, so thank you. Before I close, I want to remind you of 2 items. I look forward to seeing you at the next meeting of our Board of Councilors on June 10th. That's for Friday. And remember that the Board of Councilors has only 2 asks of its members: that we attend meetings and that we proactively support the center in our circles of influence. Tell someone today about the important work going on here at the Carter Center. And with that, I thank you for being here, and I wish you all a great day. Thank you.